Hello everyone! Today I'm going to be painting the Owl Post art kit. So I have my kit out and I have it all ready to go. I also have just a piece of paper underneath my kit, and that's just to protect my table. I have a cup of water. This is just an old jar. They work really well for water, so an old jam jar or pickle jar. I have an old plastic lid that I'm using for my paint palette. So from like a margarine container or an ice cream bucket. If you don't have anything like this or an actual paint palette, you could use a piece of tin foil or cardboard or really anything in order just to mix our paints on. I also have a pencil. So this will just come in handy in a minute here. And then I did open up all of my paints here, so we're ready to go. We can put our popsicle stick, our glue, and our string aside. That is our last step, so we're just not going to need that just yet. Awesome. So I have mine all laid out here just to start, but I'm going to set all my little extras just aside. And all of these flowers are completely optional. So you don't have to use everything that's included in the kit. You can also keep it like this, makes it a little bit less feminine with all the flowers. But I'm also going to take my little letter seal and owl claws and set those aside as well. So the letter is also optional. The kit, I did put the little feet on the base layer. So if you don't want to add the letter and just do an owl, you can also do that. Awesome. So before I get into the painting here, I'm just going to make sure both my layers are lined up. And then with my pencil, I'm just going to run along and just mark out where this second layer sits. And this is just so we don't waste a bunch of paint on the back layer, painting what's just going to get hidden underneath the owl. Now all these feathers look a little tedious, so just really kind of quickly run your pencil along. It's more just to get a general idea, and we'll make sure to paint a little bit further in there just to make sure everything is covered. Awesome. I'm going to set my pencil aside, and then now I'm also going to set my top layer aside. So for the background, you can really have fun and customize this any way you'd like. I've done yellow with white polka dots. I've done blue stripes. You could do a sky background. You could really get on Google and look up patterns and have fun and really do something unique in the background. Today I'm just going to do just a nice neutral turquoise, and that's because I'm going to use all my flowers. So I'm just going to start with something nice and neutral. So I have my blue, and I grabbed a little less green than blue, just because I like it, my turquoise a little more on the blue side. And I'm just going to grab a little bit of white here as well. So I'm just going to mix these three together and kind of see what tone I get and go from there. So with mixing paint, it's always nice to start with just a small amount, and that's just because you can get some unexpected results if you end up adding too much of one color or not enough. One color to kind of be careful with is black. It is just a very potent color, so it can really turn what you're working on. Awesome, this looks pretty good. I'm just gonna give it a little test. That's looking pretty good. I'm gonna add just a little bit more white. I want this to be just a little lighter. Oh, and then one thing, paper towel. I always have a little piece of paper towel or an old cloth nearby, and that's just for when you wash your brush, you can just give it a dry on there. So I'm just going to grab another little chunk of my blue. Just going to shimmy that out. Sorry, a chunk of white, and then I'm just lightening this up just a little bit. So whatever tone you decided to get for the background here, once you have it all mixed, we are just going to start our base coat. If you find your paint's a bit dry, I do like to add just a little bit of water while I'm doing large areas, And it just really makes the paint flow. And you can get some just really nice brush strokes with a little bit of water on there. So I'm going quite a bit over my pencil line just to make sure I have that whole area covered. And then also with your pencil line here, you want to go a little bit over it and make sure it's completely covered. And just little bits of water as I go. And then if you're like me and you didn't mix quite enough paint, just gonna wash my brush and mix a bit more. And try to get the same tone. Don't worry too much if it's a little bit different. If you do end up getting just a little bit of a different tone than the first time, you can always bring this color over and just use a little bit of water in any area that you've already covered. And with a little bit of water, you can kind of just blend the two together. But they look pretty similar. And it's going to be all separated by the owl, so you shouldn't notice a little bit of a different tone. Awesome. So once you have a nice coat, we will just wash our brush. And I'm going to set this one aside to dry. And if you did want to add any pattern to it, we will do that afterwards. We just want to make sure that that first base coat is nice and dry. So I'm going to grab my second layer here. And I'm actually going to start this one with the frame, just because we get quite close with these feathers here. So yeah, the frame would be a nice place. So I'm going to do mine just a nice, the nice dark brown. I'm going to add quite a bit of water as I go, just to get a little bit of that natural wood grain below. But have fun with your frame. Pick any color you'd like. But yeah, adding a little water to this brown as you go makes it a little bit more like a stain. So you'll see some of that natural grain come through, which is kind of a neat effect. And then I'm just going to be careful along my edges and those engraved lines. This is where you're going to be glad you have that piece of paper protecting your table. This layer gets a little messy. You could switch to your smaller brush too for some small, like the little areas like this, but whatever you're comfortable with. If you do end up going over, it is no big deal. We'll be coming in with the white after, so we can touch all this up. So. Awesome. Once we get a nice coat and have our frame all finished, I'm gonna just switch to my smaller brush, and I'm just gonna do a little bit of the details that aren't gonna be white, just because we're gonna have a lot of white here. So with my little brush, I just got a little bit of black here, and I'm just gonna get the eyeballs. Don't worry too much about going over the line, just because we will be coming in with our white. So we'll be able to get nice and close and clean that up. So I'm going to do the blacks of the eye, and then I'm going to do this nice yellowy tone for the beak. And then if you're not going to be putting your letter here, you can paint the feet. If you are going to be putting your letter here, I'm just going to grab mine. You can also keep in mind that we're actually not going to see and add the little pencil lines in anything here. But if you're going to do your feet and not put the letter, you can paint that also this orangey color, and I'll do it just for anyone who's not going to be gluing these together. Perfect. And then pretty much everything else on this piece is going to be white. So I'm going to go back to my bigger brush, and I'm just going to go straight into my paint pot there, grab some white, and I'm just going to give this a really good base coat. And then avoid doing right around anything that you did just paint until it's dry. By the time we finish the wings and the body, it should be dry, so then we can go nice and close to those lines. But for now, just avoid those areas. And then whenever I'm doing a really straight line like that, I get paint on my brush and I just kind of work it in. And then to get a straight line, I use the very edge of my brush. So I go in a back and forth motion, and you can get a really nice straight line. So up here, I just go back and forth, and I start lower and go back and forth and slowly work your way up to that line, back and forth. And then you'll get a nice straight edge there. And you can add a little bit of water as you go if you need. It is nice just to add a little bit of water and give it just a little bit of a once over. Make sure all your brush marks are nice and blended. So I am just going to avoid this area here because I am going to glue the letter onto the owl. So I'm going to go just over that line just a little bit. And then I'm actually going to wait and do this little part with my small brush, just so I can get a nice clean line there. And as the paint dries, you'll notice that the white is actually not pure white. Like when it dries, it's going to be a little bit of an off-white just because of the wood, and then also a little bit of the soot from the laser engraver. But we're actually going to use this to our advantage. So don't worry that you can see some of that brown coming through. We are going to utilize that and take advantage of that. So once you get close to some of these little areas in the face, I'm just going to switch to my smaller brush and just kind of make sure everything has a nice even coat. You can grab a little bit of water and spread any around if you need to. So now I got my small brush and I'm just going to dip it in the white. I'm going to pull some out onto my palette here. And I'm just rolling my brush in it. And I roll just so that the end has a really nice point to work with. And then I'm just going to use this brush to carefully go around the eyes. And the engraved lines are there to to help you. Awesome. Then I left a couple of my little parts down here, so I could do it carefully with my smaller brush. Everything's looking pretty good. And if you went over with your white paint at all, I did a little bit on my beak, so I'm just grabbing a little bit more yellow. And I'm just going to touch up any little parts I went over on. And I went over a tiny bit on this eyeball. And that's looking really good. So if you give this just a couple minutes to dry, and just for the white paint to set, we are gonna just go right into doing some of the detail on the owl here. So I really like using this brown here, and then I also like using this yellow here. So I'm going to just pull both of those out onto my palette, and I'm actually going to start with a little bit of the yellow. So I dip my brush into my water, and I like to get this just a little bit watery, and then I'm just going to go and on the very top crown of his head here, I'm just going to use my brush to add just a couple little brush strokes. So I'm just following along, and I'm going very light. So with your little brush, you want an equal part of paint and water, and that's what's really going to make this glide. So you can kind of test it out on a piece of paper, but we want to really just get some nice brush strokes. So I'm just following along the top of the head and just adding just a couple little lines. And this is just a little bit of texture. And I'm just going to bring this yellow right up to the top of the head there. And then we're going to put brown over top of this, but I like just having just a little bit there. And I'm just going to add a little bit of a yellow line in right below here. Awesome. And then we're going to want the same consistency when we're working with our brown here. So add some water onto your palette with your paint. And we're looking for the same consistency, so keep adding water and keep testing it out until you just get some really nice flowy brush strokes. And then we're gonna go along, and you can see the little engraved line all around here. So with this brown, we're actually just gonna go along, and we're just gonna follow that engraved line. We really just want to make the owl's face pop out. So just with your brush, we're just going along and following this line. And then I'm going to add just a couple little brush strokes. Bringing that out. And then I'm also going to just follow along my engraved lines all the way down the body and onto the feet and those little legs. So these are acting as just a really nice guide to outline everything. And then we're just going to continue this. So I'm just going to bring this along the top of its head and follow it all the way along, bringing paint all the way along the edge of this cut mark. And then we're just going to continue this and follow along the engraved lines on the wings. And I'm really just going over top of that line, almost like you're tracing it. So any of the little, there's a bunch of little jagged edges for the feathers, so just really follow those along. Dip your paint in your brush in your paint as often as you need. And keep making sure you have that nice balance of water and paint so your lines are nice and flowy. Awesome, so it's really coming together now. Perfect, so I'm just, now that I still have this watery brown, on the very top of the head, I'm just gonna add just a couple more, just make sure I got enough paint to water ratio. I'm just gonna add just a couple more little feather lines just on top of the yellow ones, just to give a little bit of texture. That's looking pretty good. Oh, and then I don't know if I got, I'm just gonna make sure this one here, there we go. Missed a line there. We're also just going to get the same little marks on his face outlined with this. And then I'm just gonna make sure this is nice and watery. And I'm gonna add just a couple little lines just on the outside of his face here. So I'm going very, very lightly. I have a nice balance of water and paint. And I'm just adding a couple little texture lines right around the face. And you can continue these. And I just lightly space them out. Nice little lines, and just take your time. And if you're having trouble with getting them really nice and thin, it is nice to just practice on a piece of paper. And it's really a motion of the wrist. So I can do it just up here. So it's really just a little bit of a flick of the wrist. And just getting the end of that paintbrush. I find doing fur and feathers like this just so relaxing because it's very repetitive, and you just kind of keep going and spacing your lines out, and it becomes very relaxing. So just practice a little bit if you're not quite getting the hang of it yet. And the key really is equal parts water to paint. That's how you get these nice flowy little brush lines. And if you went through and your lines are looking a little too dark or a little too big, don't worry. Right when we're done this, we're actually gonna dip this brush into our white. And one thing I like to do, especially when you're working on something like this, is with this white, I'm now gonna do the same motion, but I have quite a bit of white paint on my brush. I'm gonna do the same motion, but what this is doing is it's actually fading out those lines just a little bit and then making them look a little more natural. So with my white paint, you can really just kind of dab it on there. And if your brush starts to get a little dry, it's actually better to just leave it like that and kind of work the little bit of paint that's already on there. And then that's going to give it just a really nice natural look to the face. So we really just faded out those lines we just added in because we want them to be just nice and subtle. And then if you ended up going a little too dark up here, we can actually do the exact same thing. I'm going to grab some of my white and put it on my palette here. And with the same motion, you can add just a couple little white lines of texture. And down here, and just kind of fade that out a little bit. Then it was looking really good. So while we have our white here, I'm actually going to go in and do my favorite part of painting animals and humans. So this is called the Spark of Life, and it's really going to bring this owl, to life. So I got a little bit of water on my brush, and I just rolled it in the paint. And then with the very edge of my brush, I'm adding just a little dot of white. And you're going to want to add it just in the top corner of this eye, and then also the top corner of this eye. And then I'm going to add just a tiny little white line on the left sides of the eye. So what the Spark of Life does is it actually makes it look realistic. So it's my favorite thing to do on the piece. It makes it look like the owl is alive. And then with the white, I'm just adding just a touch around Just a touch around my edges there. Oh, he's looking good. So what we just did on the face with going in with the light brown lines and then kind of fading it out with a little bit of white, we're going to do the exact same thing all along the body. I don't add too much onto the body like I did the full little bit of the face. I like to do just kind of more along the edges. Add just a couple little texture lines. And then from here, I like to go in and I grab my white. I'm just adding those lines right on top and just fading these in and making them look nice and realistic. Awesome. So we don't have to go nothing too crazy, but adding just that little bit of subtle texture is what's going to make our owl look real nice and realistic. So, perfect. So when we get into our wings here, I'm going to grab a little bit of my black. I'm going to put it over here, and I'm going to grab equal parts water and really water this down. And you can test it out on your paper. And what I'm doing with this really watery black is I'm actually just gonna follow along the side here. And what I want to do is I want to show that the body of the owl is in front of the wings. So with the edge of my brush, I'm just gonna fade this watery paint onto the wings. If it ended up drying like my little bit here, just add a little bit more water and grab just a little bit more paint. And I'm using just the edge, and in a side-to-side motion, I'm just bringing that shadow all the way over. I ended up putting a little bit here, but I'm actually going to come back in with my white and just touch that up. So we'll leave this top bit white, and that's just to show that this is that very top feather on the owl, but the rest of this we can add just a really nice shadow, and it's going to make just his little body stand out up against the wings. So we're going to do the same thing now along this side. So I got a nice watery black. Just going to follow along. I'm going to follow along and put just a line all the way on. And then I just washed the paint off my brush, so it's just water. And then you can just kind of rub your brush back and forth. And just move that watery paint about. Don't worry if you ended up going too dark, just grab a little bit of white. So if it's a little too dark for you, just grab a little bit of white and start at the edge of your feathers and just blend up and in. And you can really just fade out if you got any harsh lines from doing that. But we do like having that little bit of texture. Awesome. So now that we got a really nice little shadow here, I'm gonna just grab my white, and I'm really just gonna, using the edge of my brush, I'm adding just a little bit of texture. That white up against the black is what's gonna really make him stand out and look realistic. So I'm just gonna follow that along and add this little bit of white texture. Do this so I'm not covering up what I'm doing. So a little bit of white on my brush. I'm just dabbing it along the edges. Perfect. Now you can see the depth that we got by putting that white little line here and then having that really watery black in behind. Awesome. So with this watery black, and mine's very watery, so as you can see, when it dries, it's drying a very light gray. So just make sure you got a nice amount of water there. So with the feathers here, what I like to do to make the feathers look realistic, now this is optional. If you're happy with your piece as is, you don't need to go into this much detail. But with the feathers, what I like to do with my really watery black is I run a line down the middle of the feather, and then little angle marks coming out from the center is what gives feathers So we're almost doing like a very simplistic tree. So if you run a line and then follow along like this, adding this little bit of detail, so that's the curve of the feather there, adding this little detail is really going to make the wings look realistic. So go along at a very light line. And if these are looking too dark, we can also go back in with our white and we can fade this out. So I'm going to do that after I'm done, but adding this little bit of texture is really going to make them look realistic. Once you get the hang of it, I also find doing this very relaxing. It goes quite quick once you get the hang of it. Perfect. That's looking really good. Then I'm just gonna, with the edge of my brush right now, it's a little bit dry, I'm just gonna add a little bit of shadow. Just a little bit of this shadow underneath all the little sets of these wings, just to show the depth there. And then if your brushes, if your feathers are looking a little dark, we're just gonna grab our white paint. And I'm not adding any water to this white paint. I actually like that it's quite thick. And then you can just kind of dab your brush. I know it seems counterproductive, but if you just dab your brush I'm at a little bit of an angle, and I'm just going down the brush, down the feather. It's just gonna fade it out and not make it look so rigid. And then just dabbing the brush and really adding this texture. Just fading out any of the starts of your lines. Just fade it out a little bit. Awesome, it's looking really good. So yeah, don't worry if you went too dark with the white. We'll just come in. Awesome. So that wing is done, and it is looking fantastic. So it's really about layering is the key. Is once we get those nice watery black lines in, it's just layering little dabs of white. if you're not getting quite the hang of the dabs of white with your small brush, you can also use your big brush. And with the end here, you can dip that into the white, and you can really just give it a little bit of a pounce. And just fade out any lines that are too harsh with your white. Awesome. So we're just going to continue with our watery black on the other side here. So we got our line in the middle, and then our little tree branches coming off of it. And give your brush a little bit of a roll if you're not getting fine lines. Awesome. And then with either your small brush at an angle, or I'll show you on this side with my bigger brush here, I just dab that in and just stipple, it's called. Just bounce your brush with the white just over top of those lines and just fade them out a little bit just to make them look a little bit more natural. And any of your brown outlines, you can also add a little bit of texture to them. So if you look at the difference between the two sides, they are very similar. So just whichever brush you're feeling. Awesome. Add just a little bit more white to. And I'm just using the side of my brush here, and I'm just kind of dabbing, adding just a little bit more texture. And a little bit more white. Wherever it looks like it might need it. I really like to fade out the ones on the face and make them quite subtle. Oh, he's looking good. Okay, and then on his little tail feathers here as well, we'll want to just continue and do the exact same tree and then texture. And then actually, because I'm adding the letter here, one thing I'm going to want to do is, so I have my watery black, and then you can actually grab your letter and kind of figure out your positioning. I'm going to want to just add a really nice black shadow underneath where that letter is going to sit, because I just really want it to pop. So I'm just going to add my little black lines there, and then I'm going to move my letter out of the way and just kind of fade those out a little bit, just because I want that letter to really pop. And then right between the owl's little legs here, I'm just going to add a little bit of this black on either side of his little legs. There we go. Perfect. Oh, and then just a little stipple of white on these couple ends here if you added those little lines in. I like stippling too, it's a lot of fun. So just kind of take a little bit of a step back and have a look at your piece and see if there's anywhere that you need to add just a little more of a stipple of white. I'm going to add just a little bit on the ends of here, but play around and see if where it looks like it needs it. I think we're looking pretty good here though. Awesome. Guys, we just painted the owl. Awesome, he is looking great. So just make sure that you like how everything is looking, and really play around with this brush and adding that white texture until you're happy with how the feathers are looking. So yeah, you want them to look nice and fluffy, and then we have this nice shadow line. Awesome. And then I'm just gonna, oh, he's sticking a little to my paper with the paint. I'm gonna pull him up. I'm gonna bring my background in and just take a look of him all layered up. Oh, and this is why we do this. I missed a tiny bit on my background right here and right here. I think that's the only spot. So if you have any little bits on your background that are missing, check and see if your background color is still wet. Mine is not. So I'm just gonna quickly mix just a touch of turquoise. Oh, not enough blue. And just fix that little bit of area that's not covered. So just a little bit right there I missed, a little bit right there. And if you missed an area and like me you had to mix new paint, just water down your brush and just blend that paint out just so it's not too noticeable, because you probably won't be able to get your exact tone unless you used it straight out of the paint pot. Ah, there we go. Oops. So he is looking great. So we're going to put both these layers aside, and next we will base coat all of our little pieces here. So we're gonna have our letter, we got our little seal and our little feet, so I'm just gonna set those there, and then we have all of the flowers. I am gonna base coat everything just because I'm not sure what I'm gonna use next. So I like to just have everything base coated. So I'm gonna keep my colors pretty dark when painting all the little extras here, just in order to match my coloring on the dark background and the dark wood. But feel free to do whatever color you would like. So I'm going to grab some of my green, and I'm going to pull out some black and actually just leave it on my palette here. Oop. And that's because I'm going to darken up all my colors. That's probably a little too much black, but so I still have a little bit of black on my brush, but I just kind of washed off most of it. And I'm just going to start with just that little bit that was remaining on the brush, just because black can darken things very quickly. So you just want to be a little bit careful. That's looking pretty good. And then I'm just going to get all my leaves. With this dark green. So if you're going for a different color palette, if you want to make something that's, say, pastel, you actually just add white to whatever tone you're working with. And then I add the tiniest little bit of black. And it will just make your pastel tone look a little bit vintagey. And we'll just kind of mute the tone down a little bit, which is a really nice effect. I think that is all of the green. Perfect. And then I'm going to mix a pink. So I'm going to grab some of my red. I'm going to grab some white. And actually, before I mix these two together, I'm going to use my red and just my pure red. And I'm going to just paint my little seal here. Now this one's so tiny, it's a little hard. And then I'm going to get my fingers dirty. I should have painted the sides. I'm going to paint the sides of the seal just because this one's going to stand out up against the letter. So I do want the edges of this painted as well. So I'm just going to make a real mess here. You can also wait to paint your edges until the top dries, but I am not a patient person, so I'm going to just get the red on that seal. And then I'm going to take a little bit of white and this red, and I'm going to also take just a touch of black. So a very small amount here. And I'm going to mix these all together and see what kind of a pink tone I'm going to get. Yeah, I like this. I'm looking for, yeah, quite red, a little bit dusty. I think that's quite nice. And I'm going to do all of these poppy looking flowers. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be using every single little piece yet when I go for the glue, but I do like to paint everything first, and then you just have all your options while you're layering everything up, and then awesome. So I'm really liking how that all these tones are really kind of that jewel tone I'm going for. Okay, next I'm going to go in and I'm just going to grab my straight color from here. I just really like this tone, and then I'm also going to do the little feet in this tone as well, but I'm going to start by doing these flowers here. And then I got the little feet. And I'm going to leave the feet, the edges brown, because we'll bring some brown detail onto the top of these. Perfect. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of have a peek at what I'm working with here. So I got two small flowers, I got these little ones here. And then also these little puff looking ones here. So I'm going to do these ones the yellow as well. And then I'm going to mix a dark blue. So I'm going to grab my blue here. And I'm going to grab just a touch of my black. And I'm looking for almost like a navy. A bit of a navy blue. That's looking pretty good. And I'm going to add just a touch of white, just to lighten it up just a little. It's looking good. And I'm going to do all my last little flowers in this. Awesome. And then last thing we got is this little letter here. So I'm going to grab my yellow, try to find a clean spot on my palette, and we're going to need only a little bit of yellow. You're going to want mostly white. We're really using up lots of our white. It's looking pretty good. I'm going to try to keep it away from that blue. Awesome. And then we'll just give our letter a little bit of a... I'm going to leave the edges of the letter brown as well to add the depth. I know this doesn't look much different than the wood, but it will just tone down those wood grain and then the engraved lines as well. So just give this a little coat and add a little water as you go. And that's looking pretty good. So next I'm just going to grab some of my my brown out here, and I'm mixing just a little bit of it left with what's left over in this area. I just want just a nice light brown. And so with the letter, I'm going to get this just a touch, just quite watery here, so it's got quite a bit of a fluid to it. And I'm just going to rub and just kind of make the edges. So now I'm just gonna dry my brush off. And I'm just gonna make this letter look like it's a little bit vintagey and it's traveled a long way to get delivered. So just adding a little bit of this kind of brown accent here and there. Awesome, that's looking really good. You can add as much or as little as you'd like. I'm going to kind of just add a little bit in and kind of follow along these seams. I'm using my big brush just because I do want it to be just a little bit dramatic. That's looking really good. Perfect. And then also with this brown, I'm going to do the detail on my yellow flowers. So the flowers, I tried to make it nice and easy to get detail on these. So with all the big flowers, it's actually just like a coloring book here. So I'm just gonna get my paint a little bit of water, get it nice and fluid, and I'm just rolling my brush to get that nice tip on the end. And then, like a coloring book, we're just gonna actually outline the petals. And you can see all those little engraved lines, so just kind of follow along. I can try out a little bit more water than that. And then no matter what color you did, just use a darker tone. So the reason I'm going with this brown is because I have this nice mustardy yellow. And so brown just really complements that really nicely. But if you did pink, just mix a darker version of the pink that you used. Or you could also use black if you did a really dark color. But it's really just to outline and make all these little petals pop. Awesome. Just gonna make sure that little middle has a nice amount of brown in it. Awesome, those are looking really good. So I'm just gonna move them aside. Oh, actually, I'm gonna do just a little bit of detail on these ones while I have my brown ready here. So for these ones here, I just like to use my brush and just kind of add a few little textured lines. Nothing too crazy, just adding a little bit of depth. Very similar to the little lines we kind of added to our owl, and I just am going from the middle of the flower towards any of the pokes on the edges. So that's just nice and easy. Awesome. So we got our little pink ones here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to grab a little bit of black, and I'm just kind of mixing it in this area I was in, and I'll just grab a little bit more red. So I want quite a dark because I do want it to be darker than this in order for it to stand out. That's looking pretty good there. And you can just check if there's enough of a difference, and that looks pretty good. You actually probably could have got away with using the brown on this one too, just because it's a very dark tone, just like that. So we got our blue next here. So the blue and the green, I went quite dark. So if you followed along and yours are quite dark like mine, we're actually going to do the opposite. We're actually going to make a lighter tone because you won't see anything darker just because of how dark I went. So add a little bit of white to any of the tones that you used. And I'm just going to follow along just the edges. And then if you want, you could add a little bit of a cross in the middle. So just a line from one side to the other side. So if you just, I know this is very small, so do your best. Even just a little bit of highlight here and there is really going to make them look realistic. So I just follow my edges and add a little cross in the middle. And then this one's even smaller. All about the little details. And a cross in the middle. Awesome. And that just adds that depth. So then we got our green next. We're going to do the same thing. My green is very dry, so I'm just going to grab a little bit more green. Do I have any? Oh, I do have a little wet white on my palette here. And I am going to add just that touch of black to the green tone, and that's just to tone down the brightness of it so it does match with what I went with here. And I'm going to check and see if this is light enough. Yeah, that looks good. So for here, I like to just follow along the stem and then just outlining the little leaves. Then you can add just a little line into the middle of the leaf. And then with these ones here, there's little engraved lines you can just follow along right in the middle. And if you want, you could add a little to the very edge, and then the middle, very edge, and then the middle. And just gives it a bit of depth. That's looking pretty good. Awesome. So I'm just gonna kind of shimmy my flowers up here. And I got my letter, my little feet, and my little crest. So the letter looks pretty good as is. I am just gonna use my small brush though with my this brown paint here and adding a little bit of water to it so it's nice and fluid. And I'm just gonna follow along and just really show off this engraved line. So just follow along right on top of the line and just accentuate that. And then with the feet, I like to just accentuate these little knobs in the feet by outlining as if they were little circles. So that's all I like to do, is just add that little bit of brown. And I'm working on the inside and just adding that tiny bit of brown. Just adds a little bit of depth and makes them look knobby, like they're folded around the letter. And then with the little our little seal here for the letter, I'm gonna take watery black, and you want this to be quite watery. We want to go very subtle. So like on my my paper here, make sure it's watery enough that when it dries, it's this really, really light gray we were working with. And I'm just gonna use my brush and I'm just gonna push a little bit of this paint into the little engraved grooves just to really show off the stamp. And then I'm also going to just carefully follow along the circle. And that's it. So just very subtle, just really accentuating those engraved lines. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to take my red, and I have pure red, and I have a little glob on the end of my brush. And I'm just going to really glob on. I'm just tapping my brush. And I'm just globbing a little bit of paint onto the larger surface areas to make it look like it's a wax seal. So just tapping the brush and tapping some of that gloopy paint. And that just gives it just a touch of texture. So awesome. And then last is just a little bit of highlight here. So I'm going to grab just a little bit of white if we got any left. This is a very white heavy kit. So I got a little bit of white. And this is just our final highlight. So on the feet, I'm just going to put just a tiny little dots and lines on the opposite side where we added the dark on the feet. On the letter, I'm just going to add just a little bit along this top fold, a little bit here, and then I'm just going to bring that white out just a touch on that side. So this is just kind of our final little highlight to just accentuate anything we want to. I'm not going to do any on any of these flowers. They're quite dark and the white is just going to be very stark. But just on the very ends, just tapping my brush on the ends of these yellow ones. And this is quite watery, so we're as watery as we were with our black. We don't want it to be really solid, but just a little bit of, we'll add in just a touch of depth. And I'm just going to go along and just add a little bit of a white line to a couple of my petals here and there. You don't really need to have a lot of rhyme or reason where you add the white, but it's just going to make this stand out. And I'm going to actually take a little bit of my white and mix it in with just a little bit of this red that we used. Just because I don't want to go white, it's going to be very stark on this pink. If you did lighter colors though, using just pure white is perfect. I use just pure white if I'm highlighting anything that's lighter. It's just I went quite dark on all my tones here, so just gonna add just the odd little bit of white highlight to make those look a little more realistic. And then my last little thing I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna dip my brush right into the pure yellow, and I'm just gonna dab the end of my brush onto the middle of these flowers, just adding just a little bit of pollen. So you can do this with either yellow, depending on which one will suit your piece more. And this is also optional, but I just wanted to add a little bit of detail into the middle of those flowers. And feel free, you can do the exact same thing and add a little yellow middle to these ones. We are looking good. So I'm just gonna shimmy this aside. And I'm actually gonna move all of my painted little extras to the side and pull in my first 2 layers here. So before we take the time to organize and figure out what we want to do with all our layers, we're actually going to glue these 2 together. And we'll do that now, just because then we won't have to take the time to refigure out where all our little extras went after we're done. So I got my little pot of glue here. So we're just going to give that an open. And this is a wood glue. And it is quite strong, so we don't need a lot of this. So on the back of our second layer, I'm just going to grab a little bit and I'm just going to spread it around. We really don't want to get too close to the edges, or we could have glue spill out all over our piece. So we just want to get the backs of this. Get the backs of this ready. And then I'm going to use the edge of this and just very carefully add little bits along the frame. I like to leave the little holes for the string, just because I don't want to get any glue in the way there. So we'll flip this over and line it up before you place it down. And we're just going to push all the way around. If you have any little clamps, feel free to use them. It will just help keep it together while it's dry, or you could place something heavy on top just while it sets. And if you have a little bit of glue seepage, just like I got there, it's no big deal. Make sure your brush is clean, and you want it a little bit damp, so you want a little bit of water on it. And we're just going to run that along that seam. And just any little bits that came out, we can just smudge it around, and I think we're looking pretty good all along there. Perfect. And just give it a really good push. And then make sure your brush is clean, just because the glue will, it will glue the bristles together. So awesome. I'll set my brush aside. And now we could bring in all of our little extras. So we got the letter. I'm gonna line that up. I got the little feet. And then I got the little seal. Make sure that your extras are all dry before bringing them over. mine look pretty good, but if it needs an extra minute, maybe just pause until you just don't want to get too much paint anywhere. So I'm just gonna kind of space out my flowers. You can feel free to do whatever you'd like with your flowers. You can keep them all to one side. You could use none at all, but I'm just gonna kind of space mine out so each area has a little bit of each tone here. And just really have fun with this part, and you can customize this as you'd like. And I always like to have bits of it going off, which just really gives it a really neat outer edge. But yeah, really liking all the jewel tones, and make sure that, yeah, your second layer is really pushed down. It's looking good. So once you've taken the time and you have everything in the area you'd like it, we can actually glue everything down. So I'm just going to move his little feet and the little crest off, and just really make sure you got good contact. With these small bits, it's just about being careful and line up his little feet. And then one by one, glue all the little extras down. You really only need to get the middle of the flowers, just where it's making contact on the frame. And don't worry if you got a little bit of glue coming out and over, we will fix it up just like we did around the edges. Okay, so give everything a nice little push And you're going to want to make sure that it actually has some tack before going in with your brush, or you could move everything we just laid down around. So make sure my brush is nice and clean. Hope I can close up my glue here. And just giving that a minute to set before we get in there with our brush. You can close up all your paints. Okay, that should be good there. So with your brush, just go along. And I'm just pushing it in, similar to the stippling we actually did on the wings. And if you get a little too much glue, just make sure to wash off your brush, and you can bring your little paper towel close, because the glue will dry. It's like a yellowy translucent, but go. I added a little too much glue to that leaf. Go. Awesome. So now you're going to want to wait 24 hours before hanging this. You just really want to make sure your wood glue is completely set before putting this one on your wall. But we will grab our string and we can just tie it now and then just wait to hang it up. So I'm just going to go through my corner here. And just really twist the string together and make sure you get all the little fibers through. There we go. And you're going to want to figure out what height you want to tie this at. I'm thinking that's looking pretty good there. So I'm just going to take my two pieces and I'm just going to do a simple knot. There's lots of fun ways you could tie this, and feel free to get creative. I'm just going to do a standard little knot. Standard little knot, and then if you need to trim up your edges, you can just get a pair of scissors and trim up any little bits that need cleaning up. And then if you actually separate, the little fibers, we can get a really cute little tassel on the end. And just see if it needs any little bit more of a trim. Give it a little haircut. Awesome. And then a little nail or a hook in the wall once it's dry. And our owl post piece is complete. Awesome. Oh, it's so cute. Well, thank you for tuning in and painting along with me. I hope you guys had a good time, and we'll see you next time.